this week, as we've walked through what it means to be a servant leader, and that means in the church or at home or where you work, what it means, we've come to the point where we're going to be talking about foresight and how important it is for us to have foresight. And I was reminded of a story as I was preparing the message this week, and it was a story that I gave in a sermon about 5 years ago, my very first Sunday here. So I'm counting that most of you have the same memory I do, and you'll have forgotten the story. And if you're new, then even more so true. But it was a story about 3 United Methodist men who would like to go on hunting trips together. I think they were from Mesa, Arizona, if I remember the way the story goes. And each and every year they would go someplace special and hunt together. One particular year, they decided to go to the North Woods in Canada. And so to get to where they wanted to go, there was only one way to get there. And so they rented a plane, one of those with pontoons on it, and the pilot flew them into this remote, small lake up in the North Woods. And before he let them go for the week, he said, "Now, you need to know something. I have a small plane, there's just a small lake. All the extra weight we could take would just be for one moose. So if you get a moose, one is all we can handle." So they said, sure, no problem, that would be fine with them. And they went out, and as luck would have it, the very first day out, they shot a moose. And so they went back to their cabin, and they were spending the week, whiling away the time, and trying to figure out what to do, and playing cards, and visiting. And finally, in the middle of the week, they said, well, let's just go hunting again. I mean, the chances that we'll shoot another moose are really very, very slim, so let's go. So they went hunting again, and lo and behold, they got a second moose. And so they were waiting for the plane to arrive on Saturday, and the plane arrived, and so they came forward. The pilot asked them how the week went. They said, oh, it went great, but we have a confession to make. We have 2 moose. And the pilot said, I told you, I warned you, the plane would only take 1. And they said, well, we have another confession to make. We came to this exact same place last year, and we got 2 moose last year. And what we did was we tied 1 to each pontoon, and then we got back as far as we could, and we took off. The pilot was pretty skeptical, and he said, well, we did last year. So he said, okay. And so they go out, and they put the moose on the pontoons, and they lash them on, and they get as far back on the lake as they can, and they start to take off, and they go across the lake, and they're starting to lift up, and the plane's shaking and shimmering, and it looks like it's just going to make it above the trees where the engine cuts out. And they crash right into the woods. Now, fortunately, no one was really seriously hurt, but one of the hunters was knocked unconscious for a while. And when he came to, he looked at the others and he said, what happened? And they said, well, we crashed. And he said, well, where are we? And they said, same place as last year. Well, unfortunately, that's foresight for some of us. I mean, we only learn foresight through hindsight. But the importance of being a servant leader and having this kind of foresight is so, so important. And there are 3 core competencies that go with having foresight and being this kind of a leader. And the first of those is that you need to be visionary. And so that means you kind of need to look towards the future and see what's happening. The second one is you need to display creativity. And we're going to talk more about these in a moment. And the final thing that a leader with foresight has to do is they have to take courageous and decisive action. Because you just can't sit on it. If you know and you can sense that something's going to happen, you have to act on what's there. So what is foresight? I mean, that's a great question. What is foresight? Well, foresight is, in a way, having some sense of what's coming that seems unknowable to most people. It's the ability to see likely outcomes in any situation. It's kind of a mixture where we put our head, our heart, and our gut feelings together. And we can look at what's happening and we can say, this is where we think things are going. This is what we need to do. This is the course corrections we need to make. I do want to say to you, because you're all called to be servant leaders, that anyone can have foresight, okay? I mean, it's very important that you understand that. Because sometimes we think, oh, only certain people do that. If, somebody that's very spiritual and knowledgeable, only certain people can do that. But actually, any of us can. Here's what you do. The first thing you do is you That's how you go forward. You know where you're coming from. The second thing after you've analyzed your past is you learn everything about where you want to go, the issues around where you need to go, the direction you need to take. And then you kind of let those incubate or percolate in you for a while. You just let them go. And then, after you've done that for a while, you're open to where God might be leading you. And you share that with some colleagues. And then you can get a sense of direction. And you'll probably have more foresight than you ever realized if you can put those things together as you move forward into the future. So we're going to go back now, and we're going to take a deeper look at that first core competency of what it means to be a visionary. And in each of these, as I did last week, we take a look at scriptures that surround them. And in each one this week, there are so many scriptures. I could mention 40 or 50. But I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 with each of these points today. And when we look at being visionary, I think of a couple things. I think of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and in his vision of a peaceable kingdom and of the suffering servant who would come. He took all of what he knew about God, and he studied as much, and he knew it was going to happen, and so he talked about, he had a vision for the future. Another point in this scripture is Joel. Joel is repeated then again in the New Testament, but Joel is the one that tells us we're going to come to a time when our young people, when our men, when our women will dream dreams and see visions, and something great's going to happen. So Joel reinforces that concept of being a visionary. And then I was thinking of all the things that Jesus did. What can I choose? I mean, there's so many. And I thought about the Beatitudes. Remember the Beatitudes? Those are the things like, about the pure of heart and the meek. And I thought, wow, that's the vision Jesus has for the future if we can truly learn to live together as people of God. What a visionary thing that is, to look forward to a day when all of those things can happen. So when we're a visionary, whether we're leading a committee, whether we're leading our family, whether we're leading as a pastor at the church, there are certain things we do. And first, one of the things I do is I appeal to what we call your higher angels. The part of you that really wants something great to happen. And it's in there, all of us. And so I appeal to that, and then I invite you to come along on this great journey that we're on together as people of faith. The next thing I try to do is paint a picture. What will this great future look like that we want to move toward? And so we've done a lot of that since I've been here. When we came, one of the things we first said was, we need to be a church that's involved in our community. And boy, we have worked so hard at that these last 5 years. And we're becoming that kind of place in our community that people know and recognize as a church invested in being downtown in a changing area. They know that about us. And then my goal and your goal should be to excite you about where we're going. I hope you're excited about the direction we're taking and the direction we're moving in. And then I help move us after that. Okay, we got excited. We know where we want to go. Now we need to move. We just can't sit on all of this knowledge and all that we have. We have to move with this knowledge. And now we're going to take a look now at the second core competency, which is on the screen. It's important to display creativity. Once again, I dug into the scriptures and it was like, where do I stop? But I first thought of just God's great creative action in creating the world. And God's creativity is everywhere in our world. And we sense it today in the freshness of the rain that's outside and the recreation that comes from life-giving power of water. And so God created for us. One of the other ones I think about is Gideon. You remember the story of Gideon and the fleece? What a creative story between God and Gideon. Gideon doesn't really want to do what God's calling him to do, so he says, well, I'm going to put a fleece out, and in the morning when I wake up, if all the ground is wet and the fleece is dry, I'll know this is you, God. And so that happens. But then Gideon's still not so sure, so he says to God again, he says, okay, God, how about this? I'll put on the fleece again, and it will be wet, and all the ground around will be dry. And God does it again. And so Gideon responds. Talk about creativity of the people of faith, of God working with us. It's so significant, so important. And then there was Jesus at the wedding of Cana in Galilee. The wedding ran out of wine, and no one knew what to do. We're going to have to buy some more wine, what we were going to do. And it's at that moment that Jesus changes the water into wine, using his own creativity. Of course, my favorite story about Jesus' creativity, I think, was with the woman caught in adultery. And when she's caught in adultery, and they bring her out, and they want to stone her, Jesus does something amazing. He doesn't yell or shout, or he doesn't even say anything at first. But he bends over and it says he draws in the dirt. I wonder what he was drawing. He must have done something very creative because he was able to turn the tables and get those people to change. And so he knew how to be creative, and it's so important. Creativity is this. It's novelty, something new, something we want to accomplish. We're going to be creative. We're going to find something new that needs to be done in our community or our church. We're going to act on it. It needs to be relevant. Otherwise, there are things we can do that are new that aren't really relevant to the situation. But this needs to be happening. It's something that will help our situation. And finally, then, we put some energy into it, some spontaneity, and we say, okay, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to be creative. I was thinking about a story I read this week about an engineer in Switzerland who had been hunting. And he came back, and his dog and he both had cockleburrs all over them. So he spent time removing the cockleburrs. And being an engineer, he was very curious, and he took the cockleburrs and he looked at them under the microscope. And so finally he said, boy, this would make a great way. This would make a great way of hooking things together. And so he made an invention, and he took it, and people laughed at him. But he persisted, and he kept going at it. And by the way, he invented this invention that was the combination of two words. The words were velour and crochet. And he invented Velcro. And over 60 million objects are sold every year worldwide with Velcro. And all because he could see something, he could look, and he could do it, he could act on what he saw. To be creative, we have to be curious. He was curious. There's things in the church we need to be curious about. And then we need to observe, take a look at them and say, okay, what might happen? Then we can make connections with all of those things that are going on. We can occasionally endure skepticism. Occasionally not everybody can see where we'd like to go with this new thing, and then be dedicated to it. So that's the way we display creativity. It's not, I normally don't consider myself an overly creative person, but working like this is how I create new things that can happen, new life that can be born. The final core competency is that you take courageous, decisive action. Scripture's, again, full of things. One of my favorites is James. James tells us that faith without action is dead. We need to act when we see. We need to take charge. Another one of my favorites is from the Old Testament, is the story of Nehemiah. You all remember the story of Nehemiah? Nehemiah is the one that gets a vision from God to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls that have been torn down. And as he's doing that, believe it or not, he has to endure a lot of skeptics. People say you can't get it done. But he endures. He continues to build, and he rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. An amazing story. But probably, for me, one of the most powerful stories from Scripture about courageous, decisive action comes from our God. Our God who tried to have a relationship with us and tried to appeal to us through the Garden of Eden and through the Ten Commandments. But then the courageous, decisive action came. Novelty came. When God decided to send God's own Son. When the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That was courageous and decisive action. God knew the odds, God weighed the risk, and God took the action. And so it's so important. I think this is what happens for us. We all, as we take courageous, decisive action, we need to have confidence in facing the unknown. And a servant leader understands one thing. You go through a process. And then once you've been able to develop your process, you find that clear path towards the future. Whatever it is, whatever you're going to do, that's how a servant leader leads. The second thing is you consider the stakes of the action you're going to take. Always there are consequences for every action, aren't there? But the servant leader takes a look and says, these are the consequences of my action, the stakes of my action, the risk of my action. But they also say, these are the stakes of inaction. If we do nothing, what will happen? So they understand, they know the stakes, they know what's at stake, and they go after it. And finally, I think the next piece is so important here, is that they work collaboratively, in collaboration with the church community. And they say, okay, this is where I feel we need to go. Are you ready to get on board? Are you ready to do this? And they take their own ego out of it. It's not about ego satisfaction. It's about doing what God is calling us to do. And so everyone's ideas are important in making that happen. happen. And finally, as I said, you can count on opposition, by the way. You need to be prepared for that. Because it's going to happen. Because when you take courageous action, you're always made a target by those that don't want the action to happen. And the other thing that happens is that when you make decisive action, you eliminate what someone else might want to do. And that often makes you a target for sabotage or complaining. Not that that ever happens in the church, but just so you know that it is an action that might happen when you are a servant leader in all of these ways. So anyway, I think this is great stuff. But what does it say for us? Where are we right now in understanding the importance of foresight and being visionary, in doing these things and having creativity and making actions? And I want to say that here we stand as a church today. We are now a different church than we were 5 years ago. We're not the same church. There's different things happening. There's a different energy level. There's different direction in all the ministries of the church. And I want to say that I believe God still has great things for us. And we need your creativity. We need your leadership. We need you partnering in vision to take our church to the next step, to the next places we need to go. We need you to be a part of this. There are amazing things happening here. We truly are becoming embedded in our community in ways that we never have been before. People in the community that we work with are recognizing our contribution to the community as a whole and what we do with the school children, with feeding the homeless, with housing the homeless, with all these ministries that didn't exist in the past. They recognize us. This week, Kurt Miller, our events coordinator, met with one of the student affairs directors of one of the new 4 colleges located in downtown Mesa. And he gave him a tour of our campus and he said, "Oh man, can we do things with you? Can we come together and make things happen here?" These are the kind of things that God has in store for us. We are going to be a different church. But God has wonderful things still in store for us if we're willing to become this kind of servant leader and to follow. One of my favorite things, and I have to admit, it is still one of my favorites. We've been working on it for several months now. We're getting closer. We are working towards having on our campus, right out on the north edge of the street, a coffee house ministry. We are almost in the preparation stage of being able to put things back together, which means the opening can be seen. There are wonderful things, wonderful vision, wonderful path for the ministries there. We're going to have coffee, obviously. That coffee will do several things. It will invite people from the community in, people that normally don't set foot on our campus, to come in and to share a cup of coffee and to have a discussion. It will attract those college students that will be located together. I don't know if you realize this, but one of the colleges is already committed to building dormitories down here. We're not talking about just drive-in education. We're talking about students living blocks from our church. And we're going to do a ministry. We're going to add a music ministry. We're going to be opening the music on certain nights and inviting people in to come and experience the music part. But one of the most exciting things to me, one of the most exciting parts of our vision is this. We're also going to be having forums in there about faith and life issues. We're going to be able to talk about things that are important, like the things that are happening in our world and where is God in the midst of all this. And how do we live through things like this? And the tough stuff of life, we're going to do that. We're going to be reaching out to people that we haven't been able to attract to this time. There's amazing things that are going to happen if we can follow God. If we can remember that God is the one in charge. If we can remember that God is leading us to new places. That God's church is always alive. God's church is always moving forward. God's church isn't going to be in the same place they were last year. Because they know you can't be in the same place we were last year. We have to continue to move forward. And we hold on. One of the new mottos that we've taken in our church, we're a historic church with a modern message. We don't want to give up either of those, see? The historic church is important to who we are. The historic church is important to where we're going. But the message that brings the message alive is in the method of Jesus, who took the old scriptures and brought forth a modern message. And we're called to do the same thing. The church is always about helping bring the light of Christ into the darkness of the world. That's what we're called to do. Come, that's what I want to challenge you. Come and join us in this venture. There's room for everybody. It doesn't matter your station or your age, your situation, God will use all of us in this ministry. I was reminded this week, and I wanted to use this in closing today. I happened to catch a sermon from Adam Hamilton, who's a United Methodist pastor at the largest United Methodist church in the world in Kansas City. And he was speaking in Washington, D.C. And he told a story that I heard before, but I thought, wow, is that ever like God's gift to me this week? And he tells a story about the author, Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, Robert Louis Stevenson was sitting, kind of staring out one evening out of his house and watching things going on in the street. And he watched as the man came along lighting gas lamps. Remember gas lamps? And he would have to go down, and he would get his ladder, and he'd climb up and light one, he'd climb down, he'd take his ladder, he'd go to the next one, climb up and light it, and continue down the path. And Robert Louis Stevenson seemed to be transfixed by what was happening. And finally his father came and he said, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "I'm looking at a man who's knocking holes in the darkness." You see, that's our job. That's our job description. We're called as people of faith to knock holes in the darkness. Won't you join with me? Won't you join with God, and let's continue to be the church that God has called us to be, the church knocking holes in the darkness. Thanks be to God.